The woman standing at my front door was my ex-wife, and the first thing she said to me after 7 years apart was, "I need to see your ID." She never looked into my eyes. She stared at the ground, clutching a clipboard against her chest, as though it were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. But what frightened me most wasn't the request. It was her hands. They were shaking so badly that the papers beneath her fingers trembled in the warm August air of our quiet neighborhood in Ohio. I recognized that kind of shaking. I had seen it once before, on the night our marriage ended. If you believe people deserve kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, please take a moment to like this story, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel. Sometimes the person standing in front of us may be carrying a burden we know nothing about. My name is Nathan, and for most of my adult life, I believed I understood why my marriage to Rebecca had failed. We had been young, stubborn, and exhausted by grief. We had lost a pregnancy, then lost ourselves trying to blame each other for something neither of us could control. Rebecca became distant. I became angry. Every conversation turned into an argument, and every argument ended with one of us saying something we wished we could take back. Eventually, Rebecca packed 2 suitcases and left our little house in Columbus, Ohio. She didn't slam the door. Somehow, that hurt more. She simply walked away, leaving behind a photograph from our wedding day and a silence that lasted for years. I stayed in the house. I fixed the leaking roof, repainted the kitchen, planted a small maple tree in the backyard, and learned how to live alone. I dated once or twice, but I never married again. People assumed I was bitter. The truth was simpler. I was tired of losing people. So I built a quiet life around my work, my church, Sunday dinners with my older brother Marcus, and the little things that made the house feel like home. I thought Rebecca belonged entirely to the past. Then, one Saturday morning, she appeared at my door. She looked different, older, thinner, and somehow smaller than I remembered. Her brown hair was pulled back, and she wore a navy jacket with an identification badge hanging from her neck. In one hand she held a clipboard. In the other, she held a small envelope. I almost didn't recognize her until she whispered my name. I stood there frozen, unable to decide whether I wanted to close the door or invite her inside. Before I could say anything, she asked for my identification. I actually laughed because I thought it was some strange mistake. This was my house. My name was on the deed. I had lived there for 7 years. Yet Rebecca kept her eyes lowered and repeated that she needed to verify my identity. Something about her voice made the humor disappear. I handed her my driver's license. She looked at it for several seconds. Her thumb moved slowly across the plastic, and I noticed a tear fall onto the clipboard. She wiped it away quickly and finally looked up at me. For 1 second, I saw the woman I had married. Then, she looked away again. Rebecca explained that she worked for a local community assistance organization that helped families dealing with emergency housing and financial hardship. She had been assigned to conduct a verification visit at my address. But that explanation made no sense. I had no financial problems, and there was certainly no reason for anyone to investigate my home. Then, she handed me the envelope. Inside was a photograph of a little boy. He was maybe 6 years old, sitting in a hospital bed, with a blanket pulled to his chin. His hair was dark and messy, and despite the hospital bracelet around his wrist, he was smiling. I stared at the picture, confused. Rebecca finally told me his name was Samuel. Then she said something that made the entire world seem to stop. "Samuel is my son." I remember gripping the doorframe because my knees suddenly felt weak. Rebecca told me she had discovered the truth only months earlier. During the final year of our marriage, when she was pregnant, she had believed the baby had been lost. That was what she had told me. What she had never known was that there had been a medical error. The baby had survived. Samuel had been placed temporarily with another family after complications at birth, and because Rebecca had been emotionally devastated and barely functioning, she had never received the correct information. Years later, records were corrected. A DNA test confirmed the impossible. Samuel was mine. Rebecca had found him through the records. But there was more. Samuel was seriously ill. The family who had raised him loved him deeply, but they were struggling to afford his treatment. The organization Rebecca worked for was trying to coordinate assistance. And because Samuel had only recently learned that he had a biological father, he had asked one question over and over again. Did his father know he existed? Rebecca looked at me then, and her voice broke. She said she had spent years believing I would hate her if I ever learned the truth. She had convinced herself that keeping the secret was protecting me. But now Samuel was sick, and she couldn't carry the lie anymore. I didn't know whether to scream, cry, or collapse. I thought about the years I had spent believing I had no child. I thought about every birthday I had spent alone, every Christmas morning when the house was silent, every Father's Day when I avoided church because seeing families together hurt too much. There had been a little boy somewhere in the world who had been wondering about me, and I had been wondering why God had never given me a child. I looked at Rebecca. She was crying openly now, still unable to meet my eyes. I wanted to blame her. Part of me believed I had every right. But then I looked at the photograph again. Samuel was smiling, so I stepped aside and opened the door. I told Rebecca we could deal with the past later. Right now, I needed to meet my son. 3 days later, I sat beside Samuel's hospital bed. He was nervous. When he first saw me, he kept glancing at Rebecca, then back at me. I had rehearsed 100 things I might say, but when I finally sat down, all I could manage was to tell him that I was sorry I had missed so much of his life. Samuel looked at me for a long moment and asked if I was going to leave. That question broke something inside me. I reached for his hand and told him no. I told him I wasn't going anywhere. Months passed, and Samuel's treatment began. There were difficult days. There were frightening nights when machines beeped and doctors spoke quietly in hallways. But there were also beautiful moments. We played cards. We watched old movies. I taught him how to throw a baseball. He helped me repaint the spare bedroom in my house, which became his room. Rebecca remained part of our lives, too. Forgiveness did not happen overnight. Some wounds don't disappear simply because you decide to be kind. But slowly, we stopped being 2 people trapped by what had happened and became 3 people trying to build something new. One evening, as sunlight poured through the windows of my house, Samuel sat at the kitchen table doing his homework, while Rebecca prepared dinner. I stood near the doorway and watched them. 7 years earlier, I thought the front door of that house had closed forever. I had been wrong. Sometimes God doesn't reopen a door to return us to the life we lost. Sometimes He opens it to introduce us to the life we never knew was waiting. And that day at my front door, when my ex-wife demanded my ID without looking at me, I thought she was bringing me another painful memory from the past. Instead, she was bringing me my son. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes broken families can heal, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may desperately need a reminder that life can still surprise them with something beautiful. And before you go, I have one special request. Comment, "Second chances are worth fighting for." If you believe that forgiveness can sometimes open a door we thought was closed forever. Because sometimes the person standing at your door isn't there to remind you of what you lost. Sometimes they're there to give you back something you never knew you had.